Welcome to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
Welcome, friends. My name is Rob Hutchinson. I'm the Director of Church Development for the Western North Carolina Conference, and we'd like to welcome you to today's episode of Means of Grace. And we're going to talk about what a Lighthouse congregation is and how it's being utilized by our churches, both in the Western North Carolina Conference and the North Carolina Conference, and also some ways that it's already making an impact in communities across our state. And really, it's happening across the denomination. So we're glad you're here. And I want to introduce the other folks that are joining us today. I am joined by an all-clergy cast, and we're going to talk about that in a second too. But I am joined by Reverend Sharon Lee and Reverend Wayner Dickard, Reverend Claire Clyburn, and by Reverend Marianne Ramanat. So friends, can you guys each introduce yourself really quickly and say where you're from and what your serving context is? Sharon, why don't we start with you?
I am Sharon Lee. I am serving at Gethsemane UMC in the northwest part of Greensboro in the northern Piedmont district of the Western North Carolina Conference, and we are a Lighthouse congregation.
Right. And Claire?
I'm Claire Clyburn. I'm the lead pastor at First United Methodist Church in Graham, North Carolina, which is part of the corridor district of the North Carolina Conference. We are also a Lighthouse congregation.
And Wayner?
I'm Wayner Dickard. I'm a pastor at Bryson City United Methodist Church and River of Life Fresh Expression. Our church is also a Lighthouse church, and we are happy to be that for our community.
And Marianne?
I'm Marianne Ramanat, and I'm the lead pastor at Light of Christ United Methodist in Charlotte, and definitely a Lighthouse congregation.
All right. And I'm so appreciative to you all and for the work that you're doing. And as we jump into this today, some of you listening might even be wondering, what in the heck is a Lighthouse congregation? Well, Matthew 5:16 says to us, "Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." And with this concept of letting our light shine kind of in our minds, Lighthouse congregations are local United Methodist churches in North Carolina, both Western and North Carolina Conference, that are particularly equipped to welcome anyone whose church has closed or disaffiliated. And these faith communities are a resting place, and they are filled with people who are ready to offer love and care, and they are offering spaces that are havens of peace and of grace. What we ask Lighthouse congregations to do is to provide a welcoming place for folks to belong during this time of grief and transition. And we hope that this might be for a season for some folks, or some folks might find a new church home and they might end up being in their Lighthouse church for the rest of their lives. We know that providing this welcoming space is going to come along with some deep, caring relationships and listening hearts, and of course, lots of unconditional love. And we also ask these congregations to offer ministry opportunities. And this is, not a requirement, but just to offer pathways for folks to be able to worship, for folks to grow in their faith, and for folks to be able to serve in missional things out in their communities. That's kind of the basic framework for that. We also ask those Lighthouse congregations to try to organize, remnant groups in all the positive ways of some of the faithful remnants of folks who are trying to remain United Methodist Church, to help them organize and come together, and also just kind of keep up with ways that districts and conferences are resourcing these groups. So that's kind of Lighthouse congregation in a nutshell. Would you guys, any of you, like to add to the definition of your understanding of what a Lighthouse congregation is?
Rob, I'd like to throw a little one-sentence thing out there. I think of Lighthouse congregations as welcoming hurting people and giving them a holy space to heal.
Yeah, I love that image. Anyone else want to pile in on our understanding of what a Lighthouse congregation is?
We just always say that we want to be a safe place, a safe space for people to be in, where they can worship and serve and grow as disciples. And so we just want everyone to have that safe place, and especially if they've gone through a grief process in losing their church home.
Yeah, thanks, Marianne.
I think one of the things I'd add around it is that we fully understand that as a safe place, we're also there to meet the needs in terms of healing and understanding that this has been quite traumatic. And so realizing that we're trying to equip ourselves to be able to help them through the traumatic experience that's occurring, and really falling on the heels of the traumatic experiences from COVID. And so again, being a safe space to let them live out and express that trauma.
This is Claire. I would add that what I'm noticing is that this really is a great way for us to be United Methodist in all the ways that United Methodism exists, with emphasis on things like grace and connection and growth in holiness. And so those are things that we're already doing as Lighthouse Churches. That's one of the criteria. So, but it also happens to be what's really in our wheelhouse as United Methodist. And so it's a great way to live into the things that are at the core of our identity.
Yeah, thanks. I really believe that this is going to be an opportunity for us to be the connection at its absolute best. For us to really experience together what it means to be a part of something that's much bigger than ourselves or our local congregations. And I think the last thing I'd add for this description of the Lighthouse congregations, and as part of the equipping and the training that we did in our conference, was what we ask for Lighthouse congregations is to make a commitment to be United Methodist for this season, for right now. We're not asking for this is not about denominational loyalty or anything else. It's simply, I think, to Claire's point of providing this safe space for this season right now as folks are trying to land somewhere. And what we've learned more than anything over the listening sessions was that the number one thing that people were worried about is to walk back into another church and walk back into that same divisive, difficult, heartbreaking conversation, that many people have, compared to, a nasty divorce and, all the things that are slung around. And, we ask for that commitment, not to be loyal to the denomination, but to be focused on these people. This is an outward focused effort so that we can do no harm. That's the reason that we're asking folks that if you want to be a Lighthouse congregation, then you're saying that we've, at least for the moment, for this season, for right now, we've set that conversation aside. We've taken care of that. Right now, we're remaining with the United Methodist Church. And it's not so that it's not brand loyalty. It's so that these folks can know that they don't have to worry about that conversation right now. So I think that's one of the characteristics about this that's been important, for us, and that we really emphasized as we were doing the equipping and the training around that. And probably had the most questions about that. Well, what do you mean when you want us to commit to the United Methodist Church? Are you asking us to choose sides? No, it's exactly the opposite. We're just trying to make sure that folks who want to remain United Methodist Church, so they know where they can land and not have to worry about going through what experiences they've all endured, over the last, 6 months or a year. So since you guys are practicing pastors of Lighthouse congregations, what's that look like in practice? How would you describe what it is, in a week-to-week basis? What's it mean? What's it look like to be a Lighthouse congregation?
This is Claire. I would say that one of the things that made being a Lighthouse congregation a very attractive thing for us was that the process of identifying the kinds of things you will be offering as a Lighthouse congregation were already things that we were living into. So it was not a heavy lift in terms of adding programs. It's really about affirming a way of life together in terms of what is, again, I would say core United Methodist ways of being. And so it didn't require anything new, but it really was being reminded of the core practices that we wanted to live into.
Marianne, how about you?
I think that I would have a similar response. We already have a lot of opportunities for discipleship and worship that would potentially make sense to someone who's going through this experience. But I would say it's caused us to be more intentional about listening. When we greet someone who's new to the church, we have in our minds now that this could be potentially someone who has gone through a disaffiliation or church closing. And so we listen differently, and we're not so quick to say, oh, come take our membership class. Just trying to identify who are the people who are going through this loss and how can we be sensitive to them and not push them, but just be available to them. so that they can name what kind of ministry they want to be involved in. Perhaps they just need a place to meet. Perhaps they want to be part of a particular ministry. Perhaps they want a church that they want to give to financially, to go to a specific mission. It could be any number of things. And so I think it's created more openness within us as to what does this person need.
I think I definitely echo what Marianne said and Claire. One of the things that we've learned is that it could take up to 3, 4, 5 visits to the church as our guests for them to even identify that that's why they are there. And so we are listening with very different ears, listening with very different hearts. And I think that's had an impact overall, how we approach every guest that walks in on a Sunday morning or into a particular discipleship activity. And that's been a true blessing in terms of our growth as well, is to just be patient and love them when they walk in, no matter who they are and where they come from.
Yeah, thank you. Wayner, you want to throw anything in there on what's it like to be a Lighthouse congregation?
Well, I think the beauty about the Lighthouse congregation approach is that not only is it helpful for folks that have been through the pain of their church disaffiliating from the United Methodist Church that they have probably spent their lives with, but that it helps remind us, like Claire mentioned earlier, of who we are, and that it doesn't redefine who we are. It just kind of helps us claim who we are much better, and to live into that is whether somebody's coming from a church that's disaffiliated or whether they're just coming from a really bad place in life. It kind of helps us be that place of safeness, like Marianne said, and healing. So that's what I really love about it.
So as you guys have been living in this, how has your church and how's your community responded, to you all being a Lighthouse congregation?
For us, this is Claire, for us and Graham, particularly for those who were in our community experiencing disaffiliation, the name Lighthouse Congregation was something they were looking for. They had familiarity with what that term meant. And so it was a way to say, okay, we know that they're going to be expecting the kinds of things that we are bringing with us as we come. So being a designated Lighthouse congregation has been a recognizable thing for us in the ways people are finding us in our community. And then I think for our leaders, again, it's been a way for us to recommit to those core identities as we've been talking about earlier.
How else has your church and community responded? Yeah, Marianne?
What I have noticed is that it really has given us a solidification of what was already present, and that was a desire to be a safe place for people. But it really put some language around our value for diversity and inclusion. It allowed that to be an official statement of our congregation, and I think people really appreciated that. Mainly, I just have heard from church members just saying how thankful they are for it. And it's allowed us to see greater diversity overall in every form, age diversity, LGBTQ and straight, and, racial diversity, socioeconomic diversity. I mean, we really have seen a growth in that over the past few months. And I think part of that is that we've undertaken to be a Lighthouse congregation, and that has just increased that momentum.
Yeah, great.
This is Sharon. I think one of the things that we've experienced from the community is, and I've heard personally community members who aren't church members say, we are so thankful that you are staying United Methodist, that you all are not tangled up in all the other things that are happening, and that we know we can come here and whether we're gathering for a meal with you all every other Saturday, but we can come and this is a safe space, and they know that they're not going to be engaged by us and all the issues that are out there in the communities and social media and so forth, that they just can come and be themselves. And we're hearing that from people who aren't United Methodists. They're our community that we serve.
We were talking earlier, and one of the things myself and Tim Catlett, who's the developer in the North Carolina conference, we're talking about is just the surge of positive momentum that this has kind of stirred up and caused, around our state. You can see it on social media when people, post, our church just, decided to become a Lighthouse congregation. And, we're so excited about that. And the energy behind that, it's almost as if, the churches remaining in United Methodist churches say, hey, this is something, tangible and positive that we can do to be a part of embracing, some things that Claire was talking about, what it means to be United Methodist, to be part of this connection and to be literally connected to other people and to be a place for folks to land, in the midst of this difficult time for many folks. So I've just loved the energy that's come around that of people grabbing, hey, this is something we can do. This is something we want to do. It's something we want to be a part of, and enthusiastically. I mean, it's been really cool from our perspective to watch that kind of sweep across the conference. So I think what we want to really hear too is, as I started out by saying, we're an all clergy group here this afternoon. We invited quite a few folks that are members of Lighthouse congregations and folks who are, have made their way into a Lighthouse congregation from, the church that's disaffiliated, and their voices are going to be represented here by you all. And I really appreciate you all speaking for them. Sharon, you and I were talking about, while we were struggling to get some folks to, come and join us today. You want to speak to that real quickly about, some of the reasons why? I mean, we talked to folks that willingly gave us their story, said, I'm not quite sure I want to, jump on a podcast with you. Can you speak to that for a minute?
Sure. I think one of the things that they're hesitant about, and I do respect this so gratefully, is that they are not willing to let the actual voice from themselves yet be heard because of the trauma that they've experienced. Just one particular person said they were so hurt. There was so much anger, so much bitterness and sadness. They could share it through words, but are not ready to actually voice it out so everybody hears it. And that is going to take time. And when we're dealing with and helping and supporting folks who are, in most cases, lifelong United Methodists, generational United Methodists. But I do have one particular instance where the person shared that the best part is now over a number of weeks, maybe 4 weeks, 5 Sundays, that they are slowly having those feelings begin to dissipate. There's a calmness. There's a response by the clergy at that particular church to gather them together and say, let's hear your stories. They were willing to put it to paper, but not voice it in this particular way. But the hurt is, they can feel the hurt subsiding. And they also remarked that they recognize for themselves, and everybody is different, that if they didn't start going somewhere immediately, they might not ever go to church again. And so I'll take that, the putting it to paper, so that and respecting when they are ready to share the voice on a podcast so publicly any day, so that we can continue to hug them and love them and walk this journey with them.
Yeah, I think one of the underlying things of being a Lighthouse congregation is exactly that, is to be an advocate for the voices of these folks who, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around. I've heard a lot of these stories of, in some listening sessions of, what are you going through? How can we as a denomination help and support you? And the Lighthouse congregation concept came out of some of those, listening to some of these voices that, I've got about 10 pages of notes, and most of it, when I read back over them, it still, moves me, emotionally of the pain that some of these folks have gone through. So, with that in mind, what are some of the stories from those folks that have experienced your church as a Lighthouse congregation? What have been some of their experiences? What brought them to your church? How have they been impacted by themselves or their families? How has the Spirit touched them? Let's share some of those stories around those ideas. Claire, why don't you start?
Sure. In fact, I was asking for testimony from some of our folks who've been with us because of the Lighthouse congregation, so that I could share them with our own congregation. And so I've got a couple of stories to share. One is this person writes, when our church disaffiliated, we not only lost our church family, but also our neighborhood church. This church and this class has given us a safe place with others on the same journey to process all the emotions. We all agreed we never wanted to repeat this painful process. Therefore, it was comforting to hear that First UMC had designated a Lighthouse congregation. That was a beacon of hope for us. And people have gone out of their way to make us feel welcome in our search for a new United Methodist Church family. So that's one story. Another person shared that, and this is about class experience that we offered a small group. Another person said, in the process of the class, getting those feelings out in the open are the key for me to forgiving and letting them go and moving forward with peace.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll share, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Marianne.
We have had a couple that has become part of our congregation. They have a young adult daughter who is gay, and their daughter lives in Colorado and has a partner who she lives with there. And their daughter grew up in the church that they were part of that has decided to disaffiliate from the UMC. And so they raised their daughter in that church, and also the daughter was part of a school associated with the church as well. And it ended up that as a result, she really felt pretty judged and condemned by the church and really left the church and wasn't part of any church during her teenage and young adult years. And so anyway, they started coming as a married couple and decided to join our church fairly soon thereafter. They were just looking for a more inclusive church, they said. And then their daughter came for our Christmas Eve service and came to the service, and she was really surprised by how welcomed she felt, how genuine that was. And also the other thing that really took her aback was we were doing this sermon series on Mary, the mother of Jesus, and we showed artwork each week of Mary and the infant Jesus. And that particular week, the piece of artwork that we focused on was a Mary and Jesus that looked very Middle Eastern, that had very brown skin. And there was just something about that, they said, for their daughter. It just really felt like something that she could finally relate to about the church, is that, we're acknowledging that Jesus was not white. And there's just something about that was really healing for their daughter, a new kind of experience of the church. And the parents told me through tears how much it meant to them to be part of a church that's very thoughtful about breaking down all barriers that come between us as people.
Yeah, I think that's cool. And I think, Marianne, your Light of Christ is a great example of, the Lighthouse congregation concept is not a new thing. It's not that we suddenly started acting this way. I think it's just giving a name and a voice to, what Christ-centered hospitality looks like and is. And the Lighthouse congregation is just an acknowledgement of, the good things that God's already been doing. I mean, you guys were doing that before that, back in December. That's before, we had launched this whole Lighthouse thing. So I think that's part of that recognition. I mean, being a Lighthouse congregation, suddenly you're going to start acting differently because of it. It's really just naming and claiming, what that core sense of Christian love and hospitality is about. And again, just trying to be that beacon of hope for folks who, don't necessarily associate that type of hospitality with the church, unfortunately. And that was happening before all the disaffiliation. I mean, that's just a knock on churches in general is, we say we're friendly, and then somebody walks in and nobody even says a words to them. So this is saying, you're going to walk in here, you're going to be cared for, you're going to be loved, you're going to be noticed and loved exactly where you are and who you are. So thanks. I really appreciate that. Anybody else have some more stories about how Lighthouse is impacting people?
This is Sharon. I've got one, and this is we have a couple of churches in our area that are Lighthouse congregations. So we're so excited for everybody that is receiving, all the churches that are receiving folks. And this was shared with me from one of the churches up in another part, not too far from us. I don't know if it's up or down, north, east, south, west. Anyway, it says your church feels like home. Sometimes when the organ is playing, I physically tear up. is like reuniting with an old friend. I can remember these same hymns from so many stages of my life, but here's what really hit me. It is nice to be needed and not just a number.
Mm.
And then it ended with thank you. And that's something that we're stressing to everybody. Because oftentimes we know we can say, we want you. And that has very different, we want you here, we need you, but we want all of that to be part of all of that in your life, the wants and the needs. And so to be able to read that that's somebody, how somebody feels, they're not just a number when they walk into one of our Lighthouse congregations, just fills me with joy that we're living out who we are as United Methodists.
Yeah, thank you. I've read probably 50 different accounts, everything from people as simple as saying, I walked in and I knew I wasn't alone. I walked into the church and I was treated with dignity and respect. And I read about somebody else who said, somebody recognized the fact of how much trauma and pain I had just gone through. And they didn't ask about it, but I knew that they knew how I felt. And that meant the world to me. These are the types of stories that we're hearing from folks who are encountering Lighthouse congregations. Any other stories before I got a couple other questions I want to ask. I got this great group of folks here. Marianne, I know a good bit about you and your church too, and I know you and your church both have a passion and a call for folks who are disconnected from God and from church in general. And you shared today, and I've read about a lot of your Facebook posts around what it's like to be a Lighthouse congregation. Also, I've heard you talk about and read some things that you've written about being an empathetic witness in the midst of this. And I know you're really intentional about cultivating a particular atmosphere in your church that lends itself to people being an empathetic witness. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that term means and how that applies to being churches that are trying to cultivate this culture of a Lighthouse congregation?
Sure. I think it has to do with taking a listening posture. And I think it has to do with being willing to renounce privilege in every way that we can so that we are all on the same level playing field. And if there are folks who have been rejected by the church or who have been marginalized by the church, we definitely need to be listening to their story. We may not be able to actually have empathy because we've never experienced, some of us, what they have experienced. I was just saying to my congregation on Sunday, some of you here, it was very easy for you to walk through the doors of this building today. And others of you, it took a lot of courage to walk through those doors. And I think that Jesus was always on the side of those who were being rejected by the religious and was most often opposed to those who would exclude anyone from the people of God. And so I think to be an empathetic witness is to continue to proclaim the gospel, but at the same time, we're listening and doing our best to empathize with the experiences of others.
You just made me think of, I can't remember if it was today or last couple of days of in my devotions is reading scripture of the woman who had been going through the bleeding for 12 years and made her way through that crowd and reached out to Jesus as him. And what you're made me think about, being an empathetic witness, what do we like when we're in the crowd, when we come across folks who are, coming from that perspective, that woman of, feeling, shame or regret or it's physical pain or whatever it might be, but just craving to reach out and knowing that there's something more just right there at their fingertips. And you just made me think about what's my role? If I was in the crowd, would I be jostling this person out of the way, or would I be trying to make way for them? And that's kind of what I heard in what you were saying. And it's part of this culture that we need our churches to really embrace is part of it is making space and making people feel, comfortable and ready and willing, no matter, I love how you phrase that, some of you took a lot to just walk in the door, So how are we helping to facilitate that for folks, and how are we treating people that way so that, whether they're hesitant or whether they're running in, or some people are still trying to run out, how are we helping to facilitate them to reach out and be able to experience, that the touch and the power of Jesus? So I love that imagery for that. So, church, we need to keep taking that posture. What does it look like to be an empathetic witness for folks who are hurting in need and who are looking for, whether they know it or not, looking for what Jesus just so readily gives. So thank you so much. Claire, you've been doing some interesting things from here. Our odd duck here in our group from the North Carolina Conference, and praise Jesus for you. Thanks for being with us. You've been doing a couple of things over in your conference. You've been leading a couple of groups. You've led one small group of folks. I think the beginning was predominantly, the lay folks who wanted to remain United Methodist, and their church was leaving the denomination, and just providing some care for them. And I know you've also worked with some pastors whose churches disaffiliated, even though they wanted to stay as they wanted to stay United Methodist, the pastors so well. So I want to hear a little bit about your experience with them. Let's start with that first small group of folks that you've been working with, and talk to us about how those people have been impacted by the work that you've done together. And I think we know that they've been hurt and traumatized. How is the work that you've been done? How has that impacted them, and how has that helped them kind of work through what they've been facing and what they've been enduring?
So our group is a small group process I developed is called Welcoming Exiles and Other Strangers. And so exiles refers to the experience that people were having of their church disaffiliating when they could not go with them in that direction. And we used Psalm 137, how do we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land, as sort of an orienting scripture for that group process. And it was a 6-week small group process. So people were impacted in some of the ways that I shared already, in terms of saying, I've realized I'm not alone. I've realized that when I talk about these emotions that are very difficult to talk about, you've given me a safe place for them to land and to be able to process them so that I can go forward in a different direction with peace in my heart. They have talked about one another, the importance of seeing each other in worship. So when they arrive in worship, they don't automatically feel like everybody knows each other here but me. They recognize each other. And so they sort of have automatically had some new friendships form and connections. And again, another way that they're not alone. It's interesting. We did not plan this as a new member class because we have a separate new member process class, but we timed this during Lent, and we had 16 people in this small group. On Easter Sunday, 11 of them became members of our church. Wow. It was just a way for them to celebrate resurrection. And so there really was, they got 3 separate ovations for that as a congregation welcomed them very warmly into our life together.
That's awesome. Just in those couple of statements, I mean, I think you're reinforcing again with this posture of being a Lighthouse congregation can offer to people, and the impact that it's having on folks, that there is light in the midst of a dark time. So from the perspective of the clergy folks that you've been working with as they're trying to work through a traumatic time as well, what have you been learning from them, and can they be teaching us, as pastors in ministry during this very unique and very difficult time?
So the cohort that we're working with right now is really trying to ask the question together, what kind of pastoral leadership do we need to be offering in this time? And so what are the marks of, pastoral leadership that we want to cultivate in ourselves? Some of the people in the cohort and this cohort has people from both of our conferences. There are people who are Lighthouse congregation pastors, and some of the people are in transition as they did not lead the denomination, but the churches they were serving did. We talk a lot about creating psychologically safe space, and we talk a lot about being the kind of pastoral leader who is the least anxious person in the room, who is attentive to grief and the grief process that people are in, who can provide, I love what you talked about earlier with empathetic witness, who can provide that. In our 6-week, it's a 6-session class, we will be talking about creating relational covenants, behavior covenants for groups that helps provide a sense of psychological safety. We will be spending a lot of time talking about becoming a trauma-informed pastor. And there's a great resource there's lots of great resources coming out about that right now in the Ministry Matters website. One of our pastors, Amanda Rigby, has a really good article series about that. And she's actually going to be a guest on our cohort in a couple weeks. So really trying to invite pastors to think about how they model pastoral care. Most of us, I think, feel comfortable modeling that in a one-on-one situation. But how are we using those gifts in how we lead worship, how we show up for small groups, how we, interact with our congregation in the minutes before leading worship, how we are helping our other lay folks to become skilled at showing hospitality and welcoming one another. So it's really focusing on the kind of pastoral leadership behaviors that we want to be aware of in ourselves so that we can create that kind of psychologically safe space.
Well, I appreciate you all sharing so faithfully this afternoon. And I hope that we can all continue to see that, the Lighthouse congregation should have a lasting impact and content. This isn't just to get us through this time. I hope that this is a way for us to, on purpose, re-engage in the practices of healthy church, healthy vital churches, healthy congregations, healthy hospitality that need to last regardless of whether this is a high time or a low time in the life of our church. This is just a tangible way for us to practice what it means to be the light of Christ. You're welcome, Marianne, for the name of your church. A little plug there. Just a way for us to be the light of Christ in the world today. And so thank you so much for the way you guys sharing. As we close up, just if a church isn't a Lighthouse congregation, I know what our process is in our conference, but just wanted to hear from you guys. What was the process like for you guys to become a Lighthouse congregation? Claire, can we start from you, from your conference? Because your process is a little bit different than ours.
Yes. Received the information about the covenant that we would provide as a Lighthouse congregation, the sorts of things of radical hospitality and worship, discipleship opportunities, service opportunities. It was something we were already doing as a congregation, so there was not anything new we needed to incorporate. It was just simply a way of affirming, again, those core things that we live into. The other thing I would say about that, Rob, is that for my congregation, it was wonderful for our leaders to have something to be for. And so the opportunity to endorse that we would be a Lighthouse congregation didn't require a lot of debate or conversation. It was just something we all could affirm. We are for this.
How about folks from Western North Carolina? What was the process like of becoming a Lighthouse congregation for you and for your congregation?
Yeah, it's very simple. We just read about it and the conference materials and said, that sounds like something we'd want to be part of. And so we signed up for a training with Rob, and then we learned about what the requirements were. And then we discussed it on our leadership team and took a vote with our church council members. And when we had approved that, then we were able to begin to display what it means to us to be a Lighthouse congregation. We put that on social media, on our website, and just got the word out. And then, of course, the conference also put us on the map of Lighthouse congregations.
That's right. Right. And did you get your Lighthouse banner yet?
I have not. I'm waiting for it.
Come by the district office. I think it's sitting there in the office waiting for you.
I'll be there in a few days, actually. That's
all
perfect.
Right. Fantastic. Great summation. Man, you just went right down. That's the process. Marianne just gave it to you in a nutshell. The only difference now is we've moved to kind of an on-demand. It's an on-demand process. It's on the conference's learning platform. I think it's the videos. It's 20 minutes. It's just the first 20 minutes. The Zoominar training that Marianne talked about lasted about 45 minutes or so, but most of that was just questions from folks around that. So that right now it's on demand on the learning platform through the conference website. It's got a very robust frequently asked questions section that I think really addresses pretty much everything that came up during that we discovered. So if you haven't done that and your church is thinking about that, you can find all those resources through the conference website. In fact, there's still probably a little red banner on every single page that gets you quickly to the Lighthouse information. We'll have in the show notes at the bottom all the links to things that we've talked about. I'll make sure if you're interested in some of the material that Claire was talking about from her conference, I'll make sure there's a link to you so you can contact her as well. And just want to say thanks to everybody for joining us this afternoon. and really appreciate you all living out what it means to be a Lighthouse congregation. So y'all have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us, friends, on this podcast. I hope that you guys continue to grow and be a part of this connection together as we get to be United Methodists together. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We hope you enjoy listening to these podcasts and use them as a way to stay connected to our community. Remember to subscribe to Means of Grace for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us an honest rating and a review. It helps others find this podcast. Follow the WNCC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WNCCUMC. Once again, that's at WNCCUMC. Means of Grace is produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and Andy Go of Gojo Studios.